Welcome to Syntax. On this Monday Hasty Treat, we're talking all about my Hack Week project that I did with CJ at Sentry. We built a desktop app to help publish Syntax. It basically automated a ton of steps that we need to do to publish this show. So it was a really cool experience. We built it with a lot of neat tech, and I'm going to talk you through a little bit about what we did, why we chose to do it, some of the tech we used, and all that good stuff. My name is Scott Tolinsky. I'm a developer from Denver, and with me as always is Wes. What's up, Wes?
Hey, I am excited to hear about your project and all mostly like the tech decisions you chose to make a desktop application with web languages, I guess you could say.
Yeah, totally.
Mostly.
Yeah, and you know what? We could have really used Sentry during the publishing phase of this because let me tell you, man, debugging production desktop apps is a different experience than debugging a website. I mean, the moment you don't have your inspect or get into those dev tools, you're combing through like Apple logs that I had to like set up to write even myself. I had to write the code that wrote the Apple logs. So it's like now I'm scrolling through these massive amount of logs. It would have been really nice to have Sentry on this thing. So maybe next time I can figure out how to get Sentry going on this if I have more time. And that would save me a lot of time because it helps you find and fix all of your bugs. So head on over to sentry.com/syntax and make it 2 months for free if you want to save yourself the pain of trying to debug your production software in a very painful way.
All right, so let's start with the idea. With Hack Week every year, there's always like this what should I do this year? You know, there's always a couple ideas floating around, and this is something you had been talking about for a while, right?
Yeah. In fact, even for those of you, I will be sharing screen on this. We are going to talk through it. I'm not going to rely on that screen sharing. So in case you're worried that it's going to be a visual episode, it's not. But if you are on YouTube, you will get a little bit extra here. So basically, the way we started off, believe it or not, we started off in FigJam because if you haven't used FigJam before, it's part of Figma for brainstorming. And it allows you to do all kinds of things from like dropping stickers on to leaving comments, thumbing up, or like sticky notes. And we used it for like the mind mapping kind of software. That's kind of what we used it for.
Yeah, I love mind mapping software.
Yeah, so we started off and we just had the idea of a production assistant. We went from there. We had all these different facets of Syntax publishing, right? Whether that is the creative side of publishing, your thumbnails, your titles, the publishing side of things, which is like actually pushing go and uploading to YouTube or creating a PR so that way it gets to go into our website. The way that it works is that we have Markdown files. Each one of those Markdown files imports a show. So you need to do a PR to add a show to the website. If you've ever been to the website and the show's not there, it's usually because like there was an issue with the PR or something like that. There's also the whole show notes authoring process. And when we work on our show notes, they have to do a few things. They have to have chapters that work on YouTube. So when you upload to YouTube, you get that nice click through to chapters. They have to actually be able to be exported as HTML. They have to be exported as Markdown itself for our website, along with front matter and all that stuff, where we have metadata about the show. And they have to be able to be exported as text in a way that works with our YouTube setup, like I said, with the chapter. So you have text, HTML, and Markdown all from the same source.
Which is the HTML goes out on the RSS feed, the text goes into the YouTube, and then the Markdown gets parsed and displayed on the website, right?
Correct. Yeah. So you have all these formats, and that can get easy to be messed up. We're doing that all kind of manually right now. And so Randy has like a giant long list of steps. All right, I got to do this. I got to copy this. I got to move this over here. I got to update this here. I got to generate a timestamp. I got to do all this, then create a PR, then upload to YouTube, then upload to Libsyn and all this stuff. So you can see how these like kind of sequential steps are easy to automate. In addition, he also has to run an FFmpeg script that takes the MP4 that has metadata chapters embedded. And what that does, we take that MP4 and we need to create an MP3 that has that same metadata chapter embedded. So that way, when you're listening in your podcast player, you get the chapters as well.
So we use DaVinci Resolve to edit the thing and export it as a MP4. But DaVinci Resolve does not have the ability to embed metadata of the chapters into the MP3. So we wrote Randy like a FFmpeg script, and we actually did a show on this type of thing just to like make that step easier, right? But there's that's just one part of this whole thing. And with anything, a lot of people have said they've written scripts to fix this stuff because mistakes happen when there's like a human click. It's called click ops. I love that name.
Totally.
When a human has to follow a bunch of steps, that's when mistakes start happening.
Yes. Yeah, for real. And so, I mean, a lot of it just kind of seemed ripe for being able to automate overall.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we just sort of looked at everything and we're like, all right, what can we do? What can we attempt to do? And so we wrote it all out in a big, mind map and basically gave thumbs up to the stuff that we wanted to attack. And, we only had 4 days to get to this. So, so we just kind of started there. Tech-wise, we decided to go with Tari and Svelte5 for the basics of everything here. Now, we also use a database, which is IndexedDB via Dexie. Dexie is just a package that makes working with IndexedDB a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. So, nothing crazy there. But we chose Svelte5 because pretty much everything I'm doing these days is in Svelte5. It does use a Svelte kit, and that actually creates itself via the Tori wizard, the Tori getting started, right? You do a new Tori app. It asks you what language you want to use, what front-end framework you want to use, and that adds everything so that way it works correctly,
Yeah.
It has to be like a static site. Pages have to be pre-rendered. There's a lot of caveats there.
So it's a desktop application. The UI of the application is running in Svelte5 and Svelte Kit. And then the back end, which is we'll talk about this, I guess, but like the FFmpeg, the processing, that stuff runs server side via Rust.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And if you're looking on YouTube right now, it does have an icon. It opens up as an app. It lives in my dock. It's a straight up app. And because of that, I had to get into signing and publishing and all that stuff, which was a trip itself. So as far as tech goes, yes, we'd use Svelte5 for the UI, Tori for the entire creation of an application. And then we went into Rust land only for a few things, but they were kind of like heavier operations. We have FFmpeg, which is running as a sidecar. So the user doesn't have to install it themselves. It comes with the application. So FFmpeg and ffprobe to get data and stuff like that. There's a lot here. So the app, which I'll show you on YouTube, again, I'm just going to talk through it. The app itself basically allows you to create a new project. From creating a new project, it has you drop in an MP4. And drop in an MP4, and that MP4, as we mentioned, has metadata associated with it. And since we have that metadata associated with it, what that is able to do is generate the show notes that we described automatically from the metadata. So when you create the chapters in DaVinci Resolve, that's writing to some basic data. So when we drop this in here, CJ was able to use ffprobe to gain information about this, including that chapter information. And then we were able to just send that chapter information back to the UI, run some easy peasy, JavaScript on it to convert it to Markdown in the format that we needed. And then from there, copying as HTML text or Markdown is all just super easy because you're just passing it through a quick little transformer. This UI, which is Markdown, it's a Markdown editor. This is, I believe, Inked MD, which is not something we had used before. It was nice. What CJ did is he looked at the tool that we were currently using for Markdown, which was Dillinger, and he just went to their repo and found out what is the Markdown tech they were using. So that way we knew that the transformation was going to be the exact same as what we were using already. So that way we didn't have any variation there. So again, what we do is we have, a couple of Markdown fields here. They're all getting parsed into a global store inside of Svelte, and that global store is taking care of all of the transformations we might have. There's also some interesting stuff in here, like we have templates. Like when you add front matter and metadata to an episode, it's kind of complex sometimes with all of the stuff we need for our guest information. So I wanted to make it so you have a one-click to add a guest, right? That way they don't have to guess on the indentation or the fields that exist. Here are all the fields that exist. And likewise, one of the things that Randy has to do is he has to generate an Epoch timestamp for each episode. We had to go to another website to copy and paste a date. So I just added in a input type date that automatically creates that timestamp for us. Beautiful. Automatically directly in app. So the goal here was all right, we have all these different steps in all these different places. How can we possibly remove all of those steps? So we just kind of went down the list like that and found individual steps. Again, likewise, if you update the front matter, the episode title, and everything changes for the file name. So everything happens in real time. And the coolest part about all of this is every single time we make a change, whether that is writing Markdown, changing a title, changing a show number, any of this stuff, you make any change whatsoever. And what happens is it runs through a Dexie function to save it to the database. And again, since the database itself is, and I'll show you this a little bit in code here. I'll talk through it. But the cool thing is basically anytime we update anything, we're just running a function here that will, we just run a single function. It makes sure our data is in the right format, and then it puts it into the database. That's it. But since it's writing to an IndexedDB, it's so incredibly fast that we can run both a save to the database and then sync the database to the UI without ever having to worry about speed or slowdown or waiting for that data to come back. Yeah,
it's a reactive database. Like the whole database is reactive.
Totally. And if you're looking at it, it's as simple as literally writing local db projects.put. Like that's it. And you just put your data. Then it's in the database. So we did have to do some serialization stuff for dates. Other than that, nothing too crazy. Another cool thing that we did was we added an import and export all data function. So you can import and export to essentially back up your data at any given point. We didn't want to have, worrying about storing this data offline and syncing. So we said, all right, if you want to back up your data, you just click export. And all that does is it takes the Dexie database, it converts it to JSON and spits it out as a JSON file, and then it downloads that file. And likewise, the import just accepts a JSON file, populates the Dexie database. That's all you need, right?
Beautiful.
So it's so pretty simple. And we ended up using Rust for a handful of really interesting things on this. So for instance, we added open and finder buttons, which will, again, just open your Finder. This is a Mac app, so it opens Finder to find that exact file at any given point, because the app doesn't care where the files live. So you just click open in Finder. That's actually written in Rust. That's a nice little quick and easy Rust function. Other interesting things we did in Rust were we ran the FFmpeg, which, again, will generate the MP3 that happens automatically when you drop the file in. So you drop the file in, generates the MP3, pulls in the show notes automatically, and that's all happening behind the scenes using Rust functions that we're invoking from the UI. So it's as simple as a invoke function with the name of the Rust function in there, and then that begins the process. Now, these things don't block unless you want them to block. So we have them non-blocking, so they just kind of chug along in the background.
So I have a question.
Sure.
And this is more of a question for the people listening are probably asking this right now, not necessarily me, but why is this not just a website instead of a desktop application?
Yeah, desktop app gives us a number of things. It lets us work easier with the local file system. Now, you can use the file system API, and that's totally fine. But one, this allows us to work with the local file system. Two, we get to do all this processing in its own process in Rust, right? So we can just throw all that stuff to Rust. So it's going to be a little bit faster. We don't have to worry about running these things within the client or worker or something like that.
Yeah, so I'm curious what that would look like if we did want to make this like this. This seems like it would be pretty cool being part of the syntax like CMS,
yeah, totally.
Because imagine you just edit the show notes just right from the UI and then click save, and then it just goes right to the website, and then it'll push itself, update the RSS feed, update any YouTube that needs to happen. But like the thing that would be missing there would be the FFmpeg. Now you can run FFmpeg either in the browser via WASM, or you can run it like in Node. But if you were to run it in Node, then you would have to upload the entire MP4, right? This is instant, where it runs obviously locally, right?
Yeah, and it's pretty dang fast overall. I'm sure you could probably pull this off as a website too. I think that might be an interesting thing to do. We also added a couple of small AI features. We had more. We had more planned. In fact, let me even show you. What I do is I want to update the title. What's a good podcast title, Wes?
JavaScript is dying.
Okay. So if we have a title, one of the creative things we added was just using Anthropic. I said, hey, you're a web dev podcast, generate me 10 increasingly clickbaity titles given this current episode. So we had a clickbait titles generator. So that way, if we ever wanted to, what's so funny is that like the number 10 on the clickbaitiest is almost always exposed. Like we did one of the React survey, and it was like Mark Zuckerberg exposed in the latest React survey. This one says exposed the web development conspiracy that's killing JavaScript. So I made a little clickbait to non-clickbait little graph here, and just in case we want to ideate or maybe get some ideas here. I don't think we'll ever go in the 10 out of 10 in terms of clickbait, but yeah.
You know what would be really cool is if this also involved the transcript generation, because right now the transcript generation happens after it's published, and then they go out and generate it. But there's a lot that would be helpful if the transcript happened immediately, because then you can generate titles based on that. You can generate descriptions. You can also like tag. Sometimes we have issues with like tagging who the guest is on the transcript. Having that transcript earlier on in the creation of this, I think, would be really helpful.
Totally. Yeah. In fact, auto-gen transcript was one of the things on our list that we just couldn't get to, because you think all of this sounds pretty interesting and fun, and it is. The thing that was the hardest out of all of this, and unfortunately, this was a thing CJ was tasked with. I feel bad because it wasn't me, was the OAuth flow. So with this, in this app, not only can it automatically create a pull request given the notes, right? So it takes all the notes. It will automatically create a pull request with the Markdown notes. That in itself is great. To do that, you need to log into GitHub, and to do that, you need OAuth. Now, the weird thing about how Tori works is, if you think about it, what do you need in an OAuth flow? You need like a return URL, right? And so the return URL ended up being this kind of weird Tori internal URL. And we kind of even had to fake it a little bit. There's some funny trickiness. In fact, I have the return URL being like a syntax.fm page that doesn't exist at some point. So that way, it's like kind of taking you to a page. Then this site, because it's in this window, accepts all incoming page requests, and we just check to see what that request is and then kind of hijack it. So there's some extreme trickery going on there, and I would say it took CJ an entire day. There is a way you can do this with deep links, but we found that deep links were a little bit tough on a desktop application. A deep link, if you don't know, it's kind of like a URL for an actual app. Anytime you've ever like clicked on a Reddit link and it's like, open this in app, and it actually hopefully takes you to the right place. Not so much with Reddit that often, but that's being done with a deep link, right? So there's a lot of nuts. Crazy tech. Yeah.
Can we talk about iOS? Like, you go to a website and it's like, you must open this in the app to enjoy it. So you're like, all right, fine, open the app. And it brings you to the app store for an app you already have installed.
Drives
me
nuts.
Can we fix this, please?
I feel like it's the app developers, because it's almost always like, I don't know, the apps that I have that aren't as good. But yes, that always drives me absolutely nuts. Yeah. So, there's so many cool things to go. I feel like I could keep going on and on. I mean, even the login stuff. Like, so for instance, when we do the login to GitHub, you run a Tori command that first you get the window, and you evaluate, you replace the window.location. And then it's like, man, it was so hacky to get this going. But once CJ got it, I was able to do login to YouTube easily enough. And there's all this kind of trickery stuff where we want to like hide the window really quickly once it's done. You don't want to show the window. The window kind of exists, but is hidden from the start when the application starts. There's all these kind of like crazier steps that we had to get into. Yeah.
Does it pop open like a browser and ask you to log in, or does it kick it off to your default browser?
It just pops open a window within Tori here.
I always wonder about that, because like, it's so sketchy when these websites open up this little thing. It's like, log in with Google, and I'm like, how do I know that there's no URL bar to trust? I always like it when they kick me off to an external URL. I often think about the Sentry uses Okta for logging into things. And often it goes back and forth to the browser like 11 times to
It's
sign
the
into your
worst,
Google account. Oh, but sign into this. Oh, but open a desktop app. Oh, and like I do not envy the person that has to debug that workflow.
Yeah, for real. So yeah, if you're looking at this on YouTube right now, I made this all the CSS. I made this straight up from scratch here, no frameworks or anything. Just got going with it. Svelte adds some nice little animations in here, some nice little page fades. Just overall, it feels like an actual desktop app. And I thought that was a really fun thing to do. The publishing, believe it or not, was some of the hardest stuff because the moment that you get ready to publish, you don't realize, one, that the build, sure, if the Svelte app builds, that's fine. That does not mean your app's going to work. Because what ended up happening is as we talked in our Tori episode, Tori's pretty locked down. So what I found, it was like playing whack-a-mole with content restriction stuff in terms of like, all right, now you need permissions for that. Now you need permissions for this. Now you need to tell, that I can actually even hit GitHub from this thing. So by default, the cool thing about Tori is that it's super duper lockdown. That just makes trying to finish up, if you're not familiar with all of the little things, you're constantly kind of going back and forth between, all right, I need to do this, I need to do that. There's also some like weird programmatic stuff with like the window size. Like I always wanted the window size to be like, I think it was like 70% of the total browser width, and then because it was creating it always really little tiny little window and you had to always drag it. It was also always having like a title bar. So it's like the amount of work we had to do to get rid of the title bar was tough. I had to bring in like a full plugin for that.
Oh man.
I had to do math to generate the window size, to calculate the window size based on the monitor size. Like, so nothing's necessarily easy in this, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty polished little app that we could just send a DMG to and have that working really nicely. And one of the hardest parts is after everything was done, I was like, yes, finally got this building. The app is finally working. And then I get it to our editor, it's version 1. And he's like, Oh, it says, macOS says the application is damaged. That's because you need to sign your apps. Luckily, I have a Apple developer account. I just used my own personal Apple developer account for this just because I wanted to get it out. I had to create a certificate, download their certificate, do it all, whole bunch of stuff in Xcode. I mean, I was like getting into Mac OS stuff to sign this. And once I got it signed, it all worked just fine. But if you haven't done that process before of signing an application with a certificate,
I downloaded it and it still didn't
annoying.
work fine. Like I had to go into my privacy settings and allow unidentified developer.
Yep.
Like that's why the guy we had on from Tori the other day, he's building Tori Cloud or something like that, because like that whole process of signing everything is such a pain in the butt.
It's such a pain, and I know even like the export flow when you have like updates and stuff is going to be a pain. But man, the experience is really cool. I'm going to show you. Is this the debug? Yeah, this is the release. Wes, I even made check this out. I even made a nice.
I love
you
that.
saw this, yeah.
The drag to install.
I got to make Yes, I made a custom drag to install that had a nice little background, which is actually kind of tough to make sure that this was inside it, like the logo was inside of the square and all that stuff. But, sometimes you get a custom little drag to install inside the DMG, and it's a nice experience. So I thought I'd button it up with all that.
And theoretically, you could make this a Windows application as well, right? If we are to be so sad as to hire somebody who runs Windows.
Yes, theoretically. There is a number of macOS specific hacks in here, but I think they would be fairly trivial to get going. I think some of those things were more along the lines of like assuming things were installed at a certain location. For instance, ffprobe, for some reason, the sidecar wouldn't work, so the user needs to install ffprobe on their machine. But it was in production. It was not finding ffprobe. This is one of the ones I had to dive through the debug logs in. In production, for some reason, would not find ffprobe, even though it found it just fine in development. You're like, I don't know why.
Oh man, paths, shells. It's probably like a child process that is like a shell that doesn't have the full path available to it. Like having stuff not in the path correctly is the bane of my existence.
Yes. And you know what? I thought I had everything in the path correctly. So what I had to do, this was like 9th hour stuff. I had to write a function that I'm trying to find it here. I had to find a function that guessed where the FF probe may be located. So the first thing it did is check your bin, then it checks local bin, then it checks homebrew, then it checks program files, FFmpeg. And if it's not in one of those, then it's like, yeah, you probably don't have it installed. Go install it for you. So yeah, it was, yeah. That was the whole thing. First, check to see if it's in path. If it is in path, then return that path. Otherwise, here are some common paths. Run through them. Check to see if it's in any of those. Otherwise, you can set an env variable with a hard-coded path, and that's all just to give people the option. But this was an end-of-the-line function here to just get this working.
And the idea with Sidecar is that there's like a Rust version of FFmpeg that's already been bundled up that will just work anywhere Rust runs?
Yes. In the past, I've had it so that you just run the command and you just have the user install ffprobe, FFmpeg on their own.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just easier if you get it all bundled up. And by all means, FFprobe should be bundled up in this as well, but I think it might be buggy or we just couldn't get it working or whatever.
Something's funky with it, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we had our fair share of WASM FFmpeg issues as well, deploying in production, as we needed it to like copy paste into a Vercel serverless function because Vercel was not bundling it with the actual function. So it's annoying, but it's well worth including your own so you don't have to ask the user where it is or try to find it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just a lot. And I'll show you really quick. Here's what the logs look like when you're in production. These are what the logs look like, and they're infinite. So like anything you could possibly want to, it's all in here. And sometimes there's some actual relevant information in here if you can find it. That was like for those of you not watching, it is a massive dump of just text strings. It's just if you ever looked at those Apple logs and tried to decipher it, it's crazy to figure this out. And this is all mostly stuff that I'm logging, but Tori's also logging a fair amount of information. So trying to find out like what was going wrong at any point. This is actually where like ChatGPT came in or Claude came in really handy. I was able to give it a massive amount of these logs and just say, parse this out for me. Like, where is the error in this? I can't even see the error in this. There's so many logs. I cannot see the error. And then luckily, it would almost always find it for me. So that's a good use case for an LLM in this type of thing, because again, I'm not asking it for its opinion on something. I'm just saying, hey, the error's in here. I know you can find it.
Beautiful. Well, I'm excited to see where this goes. I think it's going to be a super handy tool for our whole publishing process. Take a lot of speed us up as well as make the actual show notes and things like that much better.
Yeah, and check it out, Wes. I even made a light mode for you. The whole thing works light and dark mode.
Oh, good.
This was like a 4-day project, and look at how nice the light mode looks. I even have a custom menu in here and everything. So light mode, dark mode, that works, and that's all through. If you want to go and learn how I did a light mode and dark mode this easily, I did it using the techniques exactly that we talked about in the effortless light and dark mode episode we did on syntax just a little while ago. So if you want to learn those techniques, this was super duper easy to get working light and dark mode on this machine. So that's really all I have about this, unless you have any extra questions or anything else.
No, let's wrap it up. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you later. Peace.